Hello everyone, it's Angelica Sagath at the Osteopathy and Healing Center. Behind me, that is Dr. Still. I'm going to demonstrate some things using him today. So in our last video, we finished off talking about Dr. Still's tentative hypothesis, and it had to do with the importance of the intervertebral foramen and how that impacted the nervous system and the organs that it supplied. We also talked a little bit about nature, and that Dr. Still believed everything is perfect, seen in everyone and everything. So today we're going to start off talking about, or continue to talk about, some of the cases Dr. Still treated. There was this woman who had nervous prostration from fall heat. She was given up to die by the Council of Physicians. And when Dr. Still went to examine her, he noticed that her head was twisted. She was laying in bed with her head twisted posteriorly. And then he checked the C1 vertebrae, and it was shifted, shunting off the vertebral artery supplied to her brain. So as we continue talking about some of these examples, you're going to start to understand how Dr. Still worked, and also some of his students are going to say later on in the book as well how he did practice. So after he treated this woman, 4 hours after, he was freeing the joint movement, and the woman was back to her normal self, and that's on page 92. So people of Macon and the Methodist preacher were now further inflamed, and they turned on Dr. Still, calling him an infidel, a crank, and calling him insane. So Still found a letter from his brother Jim. So we mentioned in the previous video that his brother Jim stopped talking to him for like 19 years. And so Jim writes a letter to Ed, and Dr. Still finds this letter. And Jim is warning Ed to watch out for Dr. Still because he's gone crazy. Still managed to wean Ed off of the morphine. So we mentioned in the last video that Dr. Still went to Macon and he was weaning his brother off of morphine, Ed. And Ed, he self-administrated the morphine to himself, getting addicted. So now Still weans him off, restores him back to health, and he mails a reply back to Jim, his brother, who calls Dr. Still crazy, saying, I have watched Drew, so that's just a name that they would call Dr. Still, Drew, closely now for 3 months. I think it would be well if some more of the Stills went crazy. So at this point in the book, Still moves on from Macon, from the Macon community, and he goes off. And this is because the community was set against him. So Still said disease could be caused by falls, by strains, by shocks, and even by changes in the weather. So if a patient asks, oh, why do I have this lesion? And we'll go later on in this video and we'll talk about what lesion means, how it's different than the lesion that medical doctors use or define from an osteopathic lesion. So if a patient asks you, oh, why do I have this problem, and you could very well tell them that it could have been from the fall they had. If you took their initial intake and they're like, yeah, I fell, oh, but I was very young. As we know, in osteopathy, it could still affect the body. So falls, strains, I like to ask when I get to the ankle, have you had any ankle strains, especially for the deltoid ligament on the lateral side, because that's very common. Okay, if they're in a motor vehicle accident, have you had any strains, whiplash to the neck, for example? Okay, and shocks. Again, these could be emotional shocks, or these could be traumatic shocks to the body, and even changes in the weather. So especially people who have a history of rheumatoid arthritis in their family, for example, you want to check with them if they're also feeling different changes in their body due to the weather. Okay, so this is another case. Dr. Still goes on to treat Miss Harris. Her symptoms were vomiting, cramping, convulsions, fainting, and inability to even raise her head. He cures Miss Harris, and so what does Miss Harris do? She goes off and tells other people about Dr. Still's cure. And Mr. Chin, who had a hardware store, in Kirksville, Missouri, rents out to Dr. Still rooms over his hardware store so that Dr. Still can practice. So now Dr. Still looks into a fringe medicine called magnetic healing. He investigates this controversial fringe medicine. Since childhood, Castor was a wonderful magnetic power to heal. So this is who he goes to Castor, to learn about magnetic healing. And it was said he could divine a person's medical history purely by intuition, and that in giving treatment became charged with a superabundant amount of nerve, vital fluid, which by force of will and manipulation he imbues and infuses into the system of his patients. Castor regarded his uncanny healing power as God-given, and he believed Dr. Still also possessed a similar ability, and that's on page 97. So Still leaves Macomb, goes to Kirksville, Missouri, and he starts to advertise in the newspaper as Dr. Still, the magnetic healer, to attract some attention there. There's the only suggestion he may have briefly employed Castor's method of magnetic healing while he treated Anne Cavitt, a farm girl who suffered temporary loss of her vision after falling from a horse. She describes Still was charged with some kind of magnetic power that seemed to go through her entire body at his slightest touch. Page 98-99. His neighbor Herbert Bernard, in time he came to understand that Dr. Still was scanning his surface anatomy like a blind man reads raised letters. Page 100. So when I was in school at the Canadian Academy of Osteopathy, one of the exercises suggested for us was to have something in our pocket like a credit card and to try to read the numbers so that you train the somatosensory center in the brain to be able to pick up more fine and finer touch. Same thing here. Mr. Bernard talks about Dr. Still scanning his body like a blind man reads raised letters, or Braille. So Herbert said that his religion was something akin to the North American Indian. So Dr. Still's religion was akin something to the North American Indian, something like their Great Spirit, which we mentioned in a previous video. His shrine at which he worshipped and prayed was a shag bark hickory tree. His prayer was that everything was all right, and he taught us, or the students, reverence for our bodies as the sacred temple of our spirit. And he told us how to perfect the body so that our earthly record might be better. Old Dr. Still believed in beautifying all things in life, a phrase seemingly derived from the Shawnee orator Tecumseh, page 102. So the good people of Kirksville called him an infidel because he truly believed that God and his creator was one and the same thing. Page 102. So Still corrects now Miss Bernard's neck one day, and she has no more headaches. Now the medical doctors made capital of this, and they used it as proof that Dr. Still was insane. Page 103. So Still explored the relationship between the osseous elements and soft tissue. Bones were acting like levers. Muscles were moving the bones around the fulcrum of the joint. The ligaments fasten the bones together to stabilize the joints and check excess movement. The joint capsule, enclosing in thin film of synovial fluid, helped lubricate and protect the articular cartilage at the ends of bones. Page 104. So Dr. Still continues to work, continues to feel, palpate along the spine of his patients. He compares abnormal with normal, pathological with physiological, and he gets the gist of the whole subject. There was impaction of tissues upon a given nerve, or derangement of structures at a given spinal center. So remember last video we said that intervertebral foramen is so important. So when there is a derangement of structures at a given spinal center, whenever the function controlled by that nerve or center was impaired. In other words, if an organ or part was not in proper working order, the structures surrounding the nerve or spinal center that controlled the functioning of that organ or part were found to be out of their normal relations. Okay, so we've mentioned Dr. Still's tentative hypothesis in the last video. Basically, he was saying that if there's a problem at the anterior vertebral foramen, again, that's an important spot because that's where the nerve comes out. So let's say there's a problem right there, okay, and that's also going to affect the nervous system, and to wherever that nervous system or that nerve goes to and supplies whatever it supplies. So let's say it supplies the pelvic organs. Let's say it supplies the bladder, so it's going to affect the bladder. In some previous examples that we gave last time, it was a rib, okay, and you can see here these nerves here that go between the ribs. Those are your intercostal nerves, and if they're impacted, if there's derangement to the structure, then this intercostal nerve is going to fire, and then it's going to cause problems to whatever it's supplying, in this case the intercostal muscles. So let's say the intercostal muscles will go tight. And there's also an artery, nerve, vein, and lymphatic in that area, so it's also going to affect artery, nerve, vein, and lymphatics in that area. In the case that Dr. Still gave of a woman who was hit with the snout of the hog, it affected her lungs, the pleural cavity, to the point where she had pneumonia. Okay, so if we continue, Dr. Still now treats a youth. He was working in a copper shop, and he gashed his knee, and the cut got infected, inflamed. 3 of the physicians advised immediate amputation. Okay, so that's what the physicians, they advise immediate amputation. But what do you think Dr. Still does? Well, what would you do if somebody came in with a gashed knee? What would you do? Well, Dr. Still works on the pelvis. He works on the pelvis, freeing up different structures. He works on the thigh, and he gently rotates and stretches the injured leg to relax the inflamed and contracted tissues. By the morning, the swelling had subsided, and the boy was out of danger. Right? So in such a case, we may not be able to go right onto the structure. In this case, it was the knee, to work on it, because it could be so inflamed and so painful to the individual, so we may not be able to work on their knee. Okay, so then what Dr. Still did in this example was he worked on the thigh, okay, and he works on gently stretching and releasing the structures, okay, in the knee, and I'm sure wherever else there was restriction in the tissues. Then he goes up to the hip, and he works on the hip as well. And if you are familiar with the anatomy here, at the hip, we've got, again, nerve, artery, vein, lymphatic. Okay, so very important to release the lymphatics to help to decrease the swelling in the area and the edema. And then you let the body heal. You fix it, you leave it alone, you let the body heal, inflammation goes down, and you can do more work with that knee. So if we continue, it's amazing, because in this case, just one day in the morning, the swelling subsides and the boy's out of danger. So that's another example of Dr. Still putting all of this knowledge into practice. So Still made a last advertisement in the newspaper. Again, he was in Kirksville, Missouri at this time, and he called himself the magnetic healer. And by now, most people called him the bone doctor. Page 106. He visited Louisa. So Louisa was his sister-in-law. And, you know, at this point, I'm sure we felt this way as well. Dr. Still tells Louisa that he tried to convince others that what he had to offer was really worthwhile. He was saying it was really worthwhile, but they said against him. So he's talking about the community, not just in Kirksville, but Macune and other places that he practiced. And it seemed as if he might as well quit. Louisa looked him in the eyes, and she said to Dr. Still, "Dr. Still, I believe in you and in your work, and someday the world will see, and they will look upon your discovery as one of the greatest, and that will not be many years hence." Page 106. So it's really nice to see that he had someone to encourage him in this point in his life. Still was concerned he wouldn't be even able to provide for his family. He told Harris, and Harris replied that people are so reluctant to accept the truth. He does not understand life or death, therefore he dreads to talk or even think on such subjects, and concluded with only few men that allow themselves to think outside of popular ruts. Page 107. So Still now treats Miss Bush, who had a goiter. So he treats Miss Bush for a goiter, and after a few treatments, swelling subsides on her neck, and it grew smaller, 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 until it finally disappeared. Page 109. So now it's 1876, September, typhoid. Dr. Still has a dream, and I believe this is such an important dream. Even in school, it was mentioned. So page 110 says he sees an image of a banner floating on the breeze, and he sees a stone, a dish containing a human brain. It read on the stone, "This is of no use to any other men. It is no better than others, only in one way. This man had the courage to use his own brain and let others alone. Let all others alone." So this dream helped Dr. Still to melt away his despondency. He realized that his greatest problem lay not in external circumstances, but in his own lack of self-confidence. How many of us have felt that, or especially when we started out, until we started to see what osteopathy could do? So still recognize that in order to survive, there must also have developed not just anatomical adaptations, as evolutionary literature, but it put also physiological adaptations to enable them to resist and recover from disease. Page 111. So still wonders why people catch a particular disease while others didn't. He makes a tentative hypothesis. During periods of stress from infectious disease, the blood and tissues produce curative or protective chemobiological substances he termed body ferments. His theory of ferments drew heavily upon the research of Louis Pasteur, page 113. Okay, so Dr. Still is talking here about infectious disease and then how the body is able to produce these body ferments because of all these chemical biological substances that were being discovered, and years later further discovered, all these different chemicals interacting and having an effect on the body. So Still said it is only reasonable to look for fermentation of fluids if delayed too long in the cellular system. A closing of cells with their fluids holds their contents, and this is followed by fermentation. A collapse of cells comes with fermentation. A sluggish circulation from any cause would result in poor oxygenation. Beyond a certain point, cellular respiration by the inefficient process of fermentation. But what would cause the delay of fluids in the first place? He wondered. Page 114. So anybody will come into the office and they're saying that I have pain here, or they don't have pain, but there is a problem, and you find the problem using your palpatory skills. And we know that there will be a sluggish circulation in that area. Any cause. You had a car accident, you fell, you name it, but there's going to be inflammation as well. Because you have a sluggish circulation, you're not getting enough oxygenated blood to the area to then heal and nourish the tissues. Okay. And then the process of fermentation begins. And also, the venous system or the lymphatic system may be compromised at that level as well, and you don't have proper drainage occurring too. Okay. Flux, he concluded, an abortive effect of the artery to feed the vein, an effect traceable to cause in the spinal cord or its branches. He believed that relaxing the muscles, freeing the joints, calmed the sympathetic nerves, normalized the circulation, and therefore oxygenation, nutrition, and acidity at the cellular level, and thereby enabled the body's endogenous body ferments to overcome the infection. Page 115. Okay, so you take care of the muscles that are contracted, that are spasming, you free that up, you free up the different joints, let's say between the sternum and the ribs, sternocostal joints, and then you got restoration of circulation in the area. Now we got proper oxygenation, nutrition to those tissues or the part of the body that's being supplied. And it helps with the acidity at the cellular level. Okay, so I'm going to end off there just because we're getting to about 25 minutes.